Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve with Real Progress in Action. The question we're going to talk about tonight is parties and movements. Can they coexist? I am going to tell you at this point in time, I can't say for sure that they can, and I'll tell you why. Parties are full of rules. They're full of all sorts of other little games that you can play that have nothing to do with the movement that's in it. Parties in many ways act as a stopper, a blocker from movements, because ultimately they got rules and they can stop energy from happening. They can stop things from happening. Now, you look over at the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has superdelegates baked into their superstructure. The superstructure that is the ultimate governance of that party. Doesn't matter about the movement that's backing that party. The superstructure is there to keep any movements within the guardrails that the party wants. So in other words, the Bernie Sanders movement that we have been following now for the last 5+ years, that same movement would have probably taken place anywhere. It could have taken place in the Green Party, could have taken place in the Republican Party probably. It could have taken place anywhere. It was the movement. The problem is that because it took place in the Democratic Party, it was stopped by the rules, procedures, and governance of the Democratic Party. My suspicion is that if you look at other parties, even up-and-coming political parties, they will have guardrails and rules and procedures and everything else baked into them to keep things in the guardrails, so to speak. That's problematic if you're a movement kind of person. If you're trying to address a situation that's happening right here, right now, it's a lot different than if you're trying to build policy and trying to bake that into law and trying to build your party around these policies. And what I'm watching now is the invariable push, the rush to start talking about third-party politics again. In 2015 and 2016, we heard all sorts of stuff about third parties. People hated Bernie back then. Third parties were there to kick the legs out from under the people that were Bernie supporters. People were not welcoming. People were very, hey, we've been here building this third party, and now you come in and you think you're going to. And it's all this kind of crap. That's what parties do to movements. They're not there to elevate movements and lift movements and give them wings to fly. No, they're there to contain them, to put them in the structure, to maintain power structures, to maintain people's place within the party. You see, these people that have been organizing and doing all these party things, well, they don't want to lose that. That doesn't just mean the Democrats. That means your third parties too. And unfortunately, the other problem with movements is they aren't necessarily founded in fact. Sometimes people are just moving like a herd and they're excited. It's populism. It doesn't mean that what they're fighting for, the issue may be great and important, but it may not have any bearing in reality because you can't have a real democracy in a country that is built on propaganda. People are trying to solve problems that maybe are right up here because the propaganda machine is so powerful in the United States that people are solving problems that don't exist or that exist in the wrong framing. They don't understand it. Take, for example, the Federal Reserve. Probably the worst example in the country and the money story in this country. People know something's wrong. They see clearly that banks are getting a handout, so to speak. They see that big business and Wall Street are always getting bailed out. But they never see the people bailed out. And because populism isn't necessarily based in reality. It's based in energy. It's based in movement. Things like the Federal Reserve are not understood, so that people attack the wrong problem. See, Congress gets away with murder in this country. Congress has a constitutional authority to manage not only the Federal Reserve, which was spoken into existence by Congress, but the banking system and everything else. It's all under the jurisdiction of Congress. None of this is outside of the jurisdiction of our Congress. But because of an ideological belief in laissez-faire, it's all been let go, deregulated, largely let run as a completely private, separate institution. So populism says, let's create public banks. Let's not understand what federal sovereign debt is. Let's create a narrative that makes this idea of public banks solve this non-issue. Now, that doesn't mean that public banks are not an important thing. They just don't solve the issue that the public banking brain trust, starting with Ellen Brown, try to advance. See, because this is more populism that's grounded in non-truths. It's grounded in fairy tales, myths from the fire pit. But populism doesn't require facts. It requires energy. And energy is neither good nor bad. It just is. So what happens when populism meets a party, or when populism meets an idea that's not grounded in truth? There's a whole lot of things that can go wrong here. There's a whole lot of things that can go right also. But the question becomes, when you've got all this energy, how does a party that's built to control everything, how does a party manage a movement? I think you see that parties and movements, by definition, have to be separate. They cannot be done in the same. So when I talk about a movement at Real Progressives, I'm talking about the energy of the 99%. I'm talking about we the people making demands, motivating, mobilizing, organizing, outside the party structures that are built to contain movements and to prevent them from growing and blossoming, because the party leaders want to maintain control. I think what I need to see going forward for myself, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I've got years and years of jockey marks from trying to work within the Green Party, from trying to work within the movement for a People's Party, and from other third-party efforts that I was a part of or was willing to participate in. And I realized that I have a need for truth. It's not a matter of control. There's certain things that I need truth in, because you can't, again, propaganda is a democracy killer. Because if you've got the fake ideas, if you've got the wrong ideas, if you're solving the wrong problems, you're not doing anything. It's like 1984 Newspeak. We're at war with East Asia, or was it Eurasia? The People's Front of Judea. What was it? The Judean People's Front? I mean, you need to have facts. And it can't be suppositions. It can't be fanciful tales that make it spicy on your lips. It's got to be truth. So we get this third peg to this process. We've got parties, we've got movements, and we have truth. Now, the perfect situation, though I can't imagine it, would be the triumvirate of all three of those put together. Truth, a movement, and a party. But where are you going to find that? When people are religiously wed to myths and legends, and they block cognition, they block any information that prevents them from having an honest discussion. They prevent the very thing, the truth, which is the serum, that gets rid of all the myths and legends, that wipes away the mist and the fog and gives you that clear line of sight. But because people are petrified of what happens if they drop their myths and legends that they've held onto for so many years, they're terrified of their place in the pecking order. They're terrified of what this means to them. So they hold on. Even if it's incorrect, they hold on. They hold on for dear life, man. You ever seen that cartoon where the monkey shoves his hand in a jar trying to get a nut or a fruit that's down there, and the thing makes his hand get big? He tries to pull it out. It's stuck. Hunter comes around with a baseball bat and wraps the monkey right on the head. There's dinner. And all the monkey had to do was let go. He pulled his hand out, it had been over. That's not the way it works. And that's not the way it works with these hard-held mythical beliefs of the private Federal Reserve and all the other nonsense. We just saw our federal government work hand in hand with this beast of the Federal Reserve. And they basically bailed out Wall Street. And they got a constant refund on that, just constantly churning out, refunding Wall Street, giving Wall Street plenty of liquidity to keep it afloat. We, the people, got $1,200, some of us. But the point is that the federal government went, we can do whatever we want. There was no issue of affordability. They did it. They fucking did it. Wasn't even a thing. Just did it. Why is it that you can't see? Why is it that most people can't see that? Is the propaganda that thick? Well, then you got political parties that take that lie of private Federal Reserve. Oh my God, we're drowning in debt. Third parties that could be getting it right from day one, choosing to go with the old myth and legend, playing into the same establishment lie about federal debt. Can you imagine that? I hate the establishment. They're liars. They blah, blah, blah. But we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and use their same exact storylines about federal debt. Imagine the insanity that has to take place to be able to do that. The very tool of the oppressor that keeps everybody down. So yeah, I'm a real stickler when it comes to truth. And I'm an even bigger stickler when it comes to truth, when it comes to economics. Because economics isn't about money. Forget the money. It could be anything. Economics is about mobilizing real resources within the economy, facilitating the transfer of real resources from person A to person B to entity A to entity B, and moving these things throughout the economy. That is what economics is about. And it's about efficiently doing it too, the best way possible. Is it better to have local production, or is it better to have distributed production? Is it better to have global production? How is it best? What model is best? These are questions that we can all talk about. Because I can make a strong case for local production. I can make a strong case for local economies. I also make a great, strong case for some distribution as well. Because there's economies of scale there. You have to worry about transportation. You have to worry about how do we get this product moved across country or moved around the world. We got this pandemic here that has put a halt to that global transport, to the supply chain. So why is it that this combines with a party and a movement and truth? Because when parties are advancing ignorance of economics, and they've got these feel-good stories that they've worked out at some local workshop where they all feel good about each other because they've all had a say-so in how they design whatever. But none of it has any bearing in actual economics. None of it has any bearing in actually understanding how money works and how it shifts. And instead of hating money, or money is neutral, it means nothing. It's the way the government itself, because see, we live in a state currency environment. The federal government, the central government in this case, has control over the ability to create dollars. The states do not. The states are not monetarily sovereign. So the states are dependent, highly dependent on the federal government spending on them. So if you reduce the federal deficit, you by extension reduce the state's revenue. And by doing that, the states then create a race to the bottom where they start competing with each other and start slashing taxes, which then in turn slashes services and typically hurts the poor the most. So when parties take on economic myths, and populism allows them to create myths like the UBI, which we'll get into in a second. These are destructive because they're founded in economic illiteracy, but they got the energy of populism. But then you've got parties that are busy trying to accommodate voters, but yet at the same time maintain their little illusion of control. Or in the DNC's case, since they own the damn thing, they just do whatever the fuck they want. The people end up pushing for their own demise. So to me, it's very important that A, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we deal in truth. Truth before love, truth before humanity, truth before the environment, truth before anything. Truth, number one. Everything we do must be grounded in truth. It may not be grounded in economic illiteracy. It cannot be grounded in tales from the fire pit or tales from the bar stool. No, I'm sorry. If you haven't invested the time to learn economics, you don't get to be treated as a peer when talking to others who have invested. It's no slight on you. It's just you didn't put the time in. So you don't get an equal standing at the table on the subject. Do you understand? It's like I didn't go to med school. I don't know how to use a scalpel. I don't know how to do open heart surgery. So I'm not going to expect to be able to sit there in a room with a surgeon and say, well, you know what, actually, when I read Ellen Brown's book, I determined that I was able to be a surgeon, and I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, too. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. So you see Bernie's platform. I want you to understand why this is so important. As Bernie checks out and goes off to the next part of his career, Bernie's done an incredible amount of good for all of us. And by some bizarre chance, perhaps Joe Biden gaff machines himself to the point where Bernie somehow or another is put back in. I don't know. He has suspended his campaign. He is not, actively campaigning now. And he's kind of negotiating with Joe Biden, trying to get Joe to take on his platform. But guess what? Joe's not going to do that. He's not going to do it. He doesn't believe in it. He has no sympathy for the kids, for the youth. He has no sympathy for people that are living less than paycheck to paycheck, that are in arrears, that are in debtor prisons. He has no sympathy for any of that. The guy wrote bills like the bankruptcy laws that keep us in debt, wrote the bills that help make student debt non-dischargeable. Joe Biden's a bad guy. And really bad people supported him. And even worse, people are trying to push you to say, well, what about the Supreme Court? Well, the guy voted to put blacks in jail. Freaking the crime bill. The guy called him he's an asshole. You're not going to guilt me into that. You really think Joe Biden's going to select a decent Supreme Court justice? Is that really your MO? Mr. Clarence Thomas, Mrs. Anita Hill? Really? Another myth and legend waiting to happen, right? But the idea here is Parties have always contained the will of the people and said, we know better than you. We know better than you. And even in these, we're going to have 40 layers of, so-and-so's rules, and we're going to, by the time they've gotten through 50 layers of this bullshit, the moment has passed them. Parties are not equipped to respond to real life situations or to handle movements. And this is what's beautiful about movements. You can have a party that's advancing certain policies over here, certain candidates over there. You can have another party doing the same thing. But that movement, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about in a second, that movement can cross even Republicans and Democrats and Greens and Libertarians, like an anti-corruption movement. Represent Us has been pretty out front on this. But when you think about anti-corruption, I think about Bill Black. Bill Black, who was the guy that went after serial whistleblower, chasing down the Keating Five, chasing down the very perpetrators that brought our economy down during the savings and loan crisis, then again the Countrywide people and the whole mortgage crisis and the Big Short and all that good stuff. Bill Black. Yeah, I think about Bill Black. And a movement backing someone like a Bill Black going after corruption would be beautiful. It would be intersectional. It would be party be damned. It would be nonpartisan. Election reform. Everybody wants free and fair elections, even if you don't like the outcome. They want free and fair elections. Election reform is a movement-based thing. It's not a party-based thing. It's a movement-based thing. It's got to be a movement-based thing. It's got to be a bipartisan effort, a tripartisan effort, just a people partisan effort. The 99% have to agree and fight for that as a front, as a freaking solid front. And when you think about the New Deal and you think about the Not Me Us movement, that's a movement too. And it was kept in a damn box in the Democratic Party. And you watch these people that were supposedly not me, us, that are running around trying to sheepdog you into voting for Joe Biden. And of course, Bernie Sanders is going to come out there and say, well, Joe's a friend. I like Joe. Joe's a smart politician. He's got to see what the young people are doing, and he's got to listen to them. Okay? I'm disappointed that Bernie dropped out, but I can tell you why he did. Bernie Sanders is still being blamed for Hillary's loss when she was the most pathetic candidate of all time. But because Bernie lingered on, because he is the progressive, and he wasn't representing those centrist Democrats, he was representing progressives, okay? Because he was representing a movement, it didn't fit nicely and neatly in the Democratic Party. It didn't fit nicely and neatly in the Green Party, who thinks that he's a capitalist, imperialist, bootlicking, colonizing, whatever, right? All that crap, blah, 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 all the adjective salad that they call him, right? Sell out of this or that. He's not a socialist. Okay. So the movement didn't fit neatly into any party. It was just a movement. And they tried to shoehorn this intersectional, beautiful movement into a non-progressive party. That movement is bigger than the Democratic Party. It's bigger than the Green Party. It's bigger than the Republican Party. It is a movement that was only thwarted by the rules of the private corporation known as the Democratic Party. That movement is still alive and well if we choose for it to be. There is still all those networks built. There are still all those people that believe. There are still all those people that want the same things, that recognize we don't have time to dick around with climate change there. It was 12 years, 3 years ago. That means we're down to 9 years. And we're nowhere closer because there were idiots that ran in this Democratic primary that were busy fighting against a Green New Deal, that were given progressive credentials by some of our alt media friends. They were fighting for a neoliberal UBI instead of a job guarantee and expanded Social Security, because neoliberalism is not progressivism at all. The concept of a universal basic income sounds tasty. It's like a nice little salad with all kinds of candies on it. Until you realize that you're buying capitalist products with your UBI, which means the capitalist still controls the price, which means the capitalist still controls the supply, which means the capitalist still controls whether or not your UBI is enough to afford their goods and services, which means you're a consumption unit, which means you have no protections, which means you have no standing, which means, once again, you have fallen for the oldest neoliberal Ayn Rand trick. And it was populism that pushed the UBI. It wasn't common sense, and it certainly wasn't knowledge. It was people that were wafer thin, that didn't do the homework, that glommed on because they're desperate. And I get the desperation. Folks, I'm desperate too. And that's why I went live tonight, because I couldn't stand to watch, once again, the vultures of the third parties tearing apart this network of people, this movement. The movement people can go in green, they can go in blue, they can go do whatever. The movement, though, is intersectional and nonpartisan. So the movement needs to continue to push for the very same things. Somebody's asking me, do you support Howie Hawkins? Do you support Dario Hunter? Well, I tried to figure out a way to get a hold of Dario Hunter. I sent him a message. If you guys know Dario, I'd love to talk to Dario. Howie, I'd love to talk to you too. But the fact of the matter is that they don't have a movement behind them. They didn't build a movement. They didn't take time to build a movement. There might be a couple people that like them, that know them, etc. But Bernie Sanders has spent 40 years building this. And in the last 5 years, has cultivated it and really worked it. And it was never about him. It's the not me, us movement. And it doesn't belong to a party. That's the most important thing you're going to get out of this. It belongs to us. And don't let go of it. It's precious. I'm 51 years old. And in my 51 years, the closest thing we got to this was the Occupy Wall Street movement. And even that was misguided. But this right here, this is the most intersectional, meaning everybody, all of us are represented. I don't know if y'all remember this, but Bernie Sanders, when he went down there to Liberty University, maybe the most powerful speech I've ever seen in my life, talking to theocrats at Liberty University. And they loved him. Why is that? Because he didn't bullshit around. Bernie Sanders may not be the guy riding through with a sword and a chainsaw and an AK-47 to do all the killing. But he gave us a movement. And if you want to make it all about one guy and one political party, you're missing the entire point. Parties cannot contain movements. People can be in parties, but parties will kill movements every single time because parties want to have control. So I want you to think about what I'm saying. Don't give up this fight. Don't give up this network. Don't give up the not me, us movement. I'm not here to talk about Bernie Sanders. The platform that he put forward is the best thing I've ever seen in my entire life. There's nothing that comes close. And it's achievable in this life. You know, I hear people say that this Bernie Sanders movement, this not me, us, is just a bunch of liberal capitalists, blah, blah, blah. I say to myself, you know, if you ever watched the movie 1917, if you haven't, I recommend it highly. But in the movie 1917, two guys are asked to run behind enemy lines and get to the front to stop an offensive by the British against the Nazis. And the Nazis have tricked the British into believing that they've fallen back in retreat and that they're on the run, when in reality the Germans had reinforced the rear and they had triple, quadruple the number of people waiting there to just slaughter the Brits. And the Brits, being arrogant, as many people in this movement on the socialist side are, we're going to just take the system down because we've got the numbers and we've got the power. And I'm like, well, okay, you got two choices. You either democratically vote your way in there, or you're going to end up having to kill people. Violent revolution. There's only one or the other. You either work democratically by telling people the values and the reasons these things are important, or you start going into these businesses and you start taking out the ownership class and start taking over through violence. There really isn't a whole lot of in between. And right now, I see people trying to do the electoral path. That's why you see people building the Green Party. But if your answer to everyone that was in the Bernie Sanders movement is you're a capitalist, bootlicking, colonizing, imperialist, blah, 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 you're never going to get the numbers. You're never going to get the numbers shitting on a movement. And you're probably never going to get the numbers if you keep dealing in myths and legends with your AMI monetary reform bullshit platform. Sorry. That's truth. It's shit. And leaning on Ellen Brown and the public banking thing may sound popular, may be sexy, but it's shit politics. You got to understand the currency issuing federal government is the one that can make these bold policies, whether it be socialist, whether it be capitalist, whatever. The federal government alone has that ability. It's the currency issuer. And you would have to rip up the Constitution to change that. I'm sure you want to do that. Maybe that's the right thing to do someday. Maybe. But you don't have a plan for it now, and you don't have the numbers now. So what are you going to do? You have a Bernie Sanders movement. And I see people spending more time laughing at the pain of the Bernie Sanders movement, folks, laughing and shitting on them, than I do figuring out what about this movement made them so passionate about it. Why did they go and organize 2.5 million people out there in the streets organizing? What made them do that? What made people who didn't have money donate so heavily because they wanted to be there? And why isn't that translating to the Green Party? Or why isn't that translating to other third parties? You got to ask yourself that. It's the movement. And people keep asking, what are we going to do, Steve? What are we going to do? My God, what party? Who are we going to vote for? I'm going to answer you the way Bernie did. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I think the left is done right now. I think we don't have anything other than organizing and building knowledge and keeping this me to us movement, this not me, us movement, growing and prospering. And not caving in and not giving up this intersectional movement we've got going on and not allowing a party to co-opt that, no matter how closely aligned. It hasn't shown that it is willing to adopt the movement. None of them. They're too busy explaining why the people that were in it were dumb, why they were, oh, you're so stupid, just another cap. I'm serious. I got receipts. I got screenshots. If anybody ever dare question whether I'm telling the truth or not, I'll show you. And then here we are. Climate change is right around the corner. We're in the midst of our first taste test, other than SARS and others, and the bird flu and the swine flu, et cetera. We're in the midst of a pandemic right now. And we still don't see people taking the time to understand the economic truth that we're witnessing, that we can afford to take care of this pandemic, which by extension means we can handle paying for health care for all, a national health service for all, health care as a right for free, getting rid of student debt. This is all movement stuff. And if you try to balkanize that or start means testing it, you've missed the point of the movement. You fail. You're divisive. You're bullshit. The idea is rights, a slate of rights for citizens. And that's the first starting point. The right to vote, a right to a fair election, election day being a paid holiday, family medical leave, paid family and medical leave, a federal job guarantee that sets the national standard for work hours, for time off, for pay, for benefits, and then any other private sector entity that wants to try and hire people has to compete directly with the federal job guarantee. It serves as the de facto minimum wage, and it is actually like a constitutionally built union, taking away the teeth from the capitalists, you socialists. I'd say we socialists, but I get this job guarantee stuff and many don't, and I'm troubled by why that's so difficult. This not me, us movement, if we start turning our focus towards supporting a Joe Biden, we lose the movement. All of a sudden, people start splintering off. If we try to green enter or this enter or that enter or this exit or that exit, if that becomes the focal point and not the movement, we lose. The issue is maintaining not me, us at all costs. Hold on to it for dear life and don't ever let it go. Movements are not meant for parties, but parties, if they're wise, will pay attention to movements. I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progress in Action. Have a great day, everybody. I'm out.